Hello everyone, and happy Wednesday. Well, actually, it is happy Tuesday, and it's happy election day. Oh, I am just so happy this day has finally come. Ah, yes, I won't lie, there's a little bit of nervous energy also. But I am choosing to practice positive uncertainty, and I'm focusing on what it is I'm hoping will happen. And so for this week's painting project, I have decided to paint exactly that, hope. So that may sound a little bit strange, but I am really focusing these days on trying to calm my anxiety and focus on creating what it is I want to bring forward in this world. Last week I painted a painting themed with peace, love, and kindness, and this week's painting is full of hope. And so I chose some symbols that to me represent hope, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on for my project. Now, if you have had a chance to visit my website, and if you've also been watching my videos here on YouTube, you may have noticed that I have a hummingbird as part of my logo. It's a very simple logo, but I needed to include a hummingbird because for me, it is a beautiful symbol of hope. And so this week's painting will include a hummingbird. And of course, hummingbirds come into our yards looking for flowers. So there will be flowers as well. And I think flowers are also another great symbol of hope. So I hope you'll feel like joining me and painting with me. And if you don't feel like painting because you're exhausted from all the stuff that's been going on, please grab yourself a cup of your favorite brew, sit down, relax, and enjoy the video. Thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me that you are. Thank you. I started my process this week in the same way I usually do, by creating a background with a light wash of color and then sprinkling some salt. I let that all dry, and then after it was dry, I removed my salt and proceeded to add an image transfer of 2 flowers and a little hummingbird. As I've mentioned before, when it comes to image transfers, I like to keep the details that I transfer as simple as possible, because to me this gives me more room for my imagination to take over and to create what I want to create in the way I want to create it. And the thing with details is they may seem like they could be helpful, but they can also complicate things when we have too many details on our paper. The way I love to work with watercolors, when it comes to working with representations of different objects, is that I like to apply light washes of color and then build up my layers of color as I go along to intensify the colors. This tends to brighten the colors and intensify the colors without having to add too much pigment to the paper. And that also makes it much easier for me to work with my pens and other tools when I want to start adding details later on. Sometimes if the watercolor is too thick, or I guess less diluted, what happens is your colors on the paper may seem a little bit more deep and intense, which is what you ultimately want to achieve. However, it can be very difficult to use your pens over the surface of the watercolor once it's dried, because it tends to almost leave like a chalky residue on the paper. And I think this is what ends up clogging the pens. So by building the layers very lightly with washes of color and multiple layers of color, once you get to working on adding those details with pens, it's a lot easier. I erased my little hummingbird's eye and I decided to change it a little bit because I had made it look almost angry. And that is the last thing I wanted to do. And so I'm changing it to a softer looking eye. You won't see this very much until I actually get to adding paint to it, but for now I think it's going to be a much better guide for me to use later on. Over the last few weeks, I have been painting more representational paintings than I have in the past. And I think the reason for this is just that I needed to change things up for myself. I love abstract work and I'm not done creating abstract work, but it's also good for us to stretch our muscles and try new things. And so it's been good for me to actually paint some different things, paint things that are a little bit more challenging for me to paint, just so I can do exactly that. Stretch my muscles and strengthen them, my creative muscles, that is. And it's also kind of been very good for me from an inspirational standpoint. When you're constantly doing the same type of work, at some point it can start to feel like you don't really know where to go next. And by switching things up, it becomes easier to feel that inspiration. I guess I've also been feeling a need to really focus my energy because I've had a lot of anxiety regarding the election. I think a lot of people have. And if I paint something that's almost too easy for me to paint, and I hope that doesn't sound like I'm boasting or anything, but you know, when you repeat the same things over and over, it does get easier, right? By creating something that's a little bit more complex that really requires me to focus a little bit harder, it helps me be grounded more. And by grounding more, I am fully mindful of being in this present moment because I'm trying to work on something that is challenging me. And in order for me to accomplish what it is I hope to accomplish with my painting process, I have to be a little bit more deliberate and really think about what it is I am doing. I hope this makes sense. For me, it's been so helpful. I really feel like it's helped me stay focused on doing the things I wanted to do and the things I needed to do every day, while also not letting myself get carried away with my anxiety. So instead of letting my anxiety consume me, I am using focused action. And this focused action is helping me be very hopeful. I've always been a very hopeful person. I, like everyone else, have setbacks, and there are moments in life where I am faced with challenges and things do bring me down. I have mentioned in the past that I have struggled with depression. And at the end of the day, even though I have these struggles, I am, I think, very resilient and capable of overcoming my challenges because of that resilience and also because of the fact that I am very hopeful. I know that even though there are setbacks in life and there are things that happen that seem to be beyond our control and that can get us down, no matter what, when the sun goes down, not too long after, the sun rises again. And so, yeah, I feel very hopeful. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I don't know what the results of the election will be. I just know that I am equipped with everything I need to make it through whatever it is I need to make it through. And you know what? None of us have to do this alone. We can do it together. And the key is to do it together, because together we can overcome just about anything. All right, back to my painting process. So I added some more color to my background because I wanted to start building up those layers of colors that I mentioned earlier. And now I'm working on adding some more intense color. That means less diluted paint to the areas where the values are darker. So I'm basically creating some shading. When you're working on creating work that is more representational, it's always good to work with an image because the image will guide you. When you're looking at that image, really observe the areas that have dimension. Because the thing is, when you're working with an image, it very rarely will happen that you're going to be working with something that's very flat. Like, for instance, before I even started adding any of this quote unquote shading, everything looked very flat. You could tell that there were some basic shapes, but the shapes were very abstracted. There was not a whole lot of detail added to the painting at that point. Adding some value shifts by adding details in and shading the way that I'm doing right now starts to make the painting become more alive, and it helps to make your shapes start to have more dimension. As you continue to work, observe not just the shapes, not just the shading, but observe the value shifting. There are, in just about any image you'll look at, different values. So there are some very light values, like for instance, the lightest value in my painting right now is the hummingbird because it's completely white. There's not a whole lot there. A lot of mid values are also in my painting at this point, and I'm working on creating some darker and darker values by diluting my paint less, and adding darker paint. So eventually my values are going to get darker and darker, and that is the thing that's going to really help to bring those different shapes to life in the painting. When I say the images in the painting are starting to become more alive, it's not so much that they're becoming alive, it's that they're moving from being more abstract to being more concrete. And it makes it easier for the eye to discern what it is you are painting.
For this project in particular, my aim is really to create something representational, not something realistic. And when I have a very clear set of, I guess, ideas of what it is I'm actually trying to do, I guess I put less pressure on myself. If I were trying to create a realistic painting, honestly, I probably wouldn't do so for a YouTube video. Uh, it would take me a long time because I would be really thinking long and hard about how to go about doing it and making it successful. And so that's not the aim for me here. The aim for me is to create something representational of some flowers and a hummingbird, and to also not make it so complicated that I start to grow anxious about not being able to actually achieve my goal. So by keeping it rather simple, it also helps to alleviate some of the stress I might feel if I were trying to do something more complicated. And that for me is very helpful because the less in my head I am about my creative process, the better and the easier things seem to flow. Being that we moved to a new house last year, this summer I wasn't really 100% sure I would get to see a lot of hummingbirds like I have in the past. But I did plant flowers that was hoping would attract them, and I was very pleasantly surprised that we had quite a few visit our yard. And since they say hummingbirds remember every flower and every feeder they have visited, I'm hopeful that this means I'll see more of them next year. According to LeBaron, hummingbirds go the farthest of any bird in proportion to their body length in terms of migratory feats. In fact, these little birds, who are often no bigger than 2.5 inches in length, can travel thousands of miles to get to their breeding and feeding grounds. They can even travel 500 miles in a single go. Again, according to LeBaron, some ruby-throated hummingbirds fly 500 miles nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico during both spring and fall migrations. They really are very impressive little creatures, and I could go on and on about them because I do really love them very much. I guess for me, they represent hope because they wander at these very long distances, fully expecting and I think hoping that when they get to their destination, they are going to find what it is they're looking for. If that's not a great example of practicing positive uncertainty and focused action, I really don't know what is. I also think flowers in general are very hopeful. They are typically very ephemeral, which means that they have a very short span of life and they die. But some of them, in the right conditions, are also perennial, which means they come back year after year. They go into a period of dormancy, and then once the conditions start to change and become more favorable for growth, they start sprouting out of the ground again. They trust that the nutrients and the water they need to survive and thrive will be available to them. But they don't take anything for granted. And at the end of their life cycle, they start producing seeds and they drop these seeds in the ground so they can come back to live another day. It's a really quite a miraculous process, in my mind, anyway. And I feel like to be a gardener is to be a hopeful person, and to be a flower requires a ton of hope. And so I feel like both the hummingbird and flowers are great symbols for hope. And yeah, I think it's a good thing to be hopeful. When working with a reference image to start a project, I think it's good to keep it on hand in the beginning and then eventually to move away from using the reference. Tend to use it more so for shading, development of values, and then I try to move away from it for everything else. Because if I stay too stuck on recreating what I see in front of me, then I lose the opportunity for my imagination to step in and my intuition to also step in to guide me to doing something that may be a little bit different than what's in the image, but something that will also be more representative of me and my style of creating. So I selected an image of a hummingbird in a pose that I felt would be relatively simple for me to recreate. And then I stepped away from the image and I started to add my colors because the image I selected, in fact, didn't have a whole lot of color to it. And I wanted my hummingbird to be a celebration of life and hope, and it felt like the colors in the the hummingbird image that I had selected just weren't really translating that for me. And so by stepping away from the image, I gave myself the space to explore possibilities. At this point, some parts of my painting had a lot of vibrant color, and then the top part of the painting felt very bland. And so I decided I was going to use a light wash of the same pink that I used in my hummingbird and in my flowers. And I wanted to spread some of that in the upper part of the painting. Initially, I didn't think I'd want to bring it down as low as I eventually will, but I think adding these colors to the painting helps with the overall composition. Of course, yes, this painting is absolutely calling for some gold. And the best gold for this painting is definitely my 24 karat Merc gold. It is going to just bring everything together. It's going to add just the right amount of shimmer and glimmer with those eye-catching sparkles. And I think once I've added this, I might also move with my intuition's guidance to maybe add a little bit of shimmer to my hummingbird as well. When you look at hummingbird pictures online, and even when you're lucky enough to have a chance to see them, their feathers do seem to have a shimmery aspect to them. And so I feel like it's really fitting that this little hummingbird should also get some shimmer pizzazz. Just a few more little splatters of gold and I'll be ready to call this painting finished. It may be fall here in Maine, but it's summer somewhere on our beautiful planet, and these bright and cheerful colors, that little hummingbird and the flowers really inspire hope. Here's a quote I found on Pinterest and really like. Hope is a feeling in your heart and soul. It is the anchor of the soul. It can weather any storm. It will carry you through your darkest times and make you smile in your happiest. It's what keeps you going no matter what. A feeling of trust. To believe, to desire, the only thing stronger than fear. The first step on the road to disappointment. The compass you have when you are lost. Of course, not everyone can win this election, but here's to hoping no matter who wins, we can rise together and move forward. You are all in my thoughts and in my heart. Thank you again for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating, sweet friends.